Yeah, welcome to this wonderful session. Thank you for joining us despite the very good weather outside. And we'll be discussing here transparency and ethical AI, which is a topic of very high concern. I've been involved in some of the discussions we had with the German government regarding the effects of AI, in particular Google search mechanisms and the potential impact on German elections, which was one topic very high on the agenda for the German Bundestag at some point. I certainly know from practical experience and policy that this is a very demanding and very difficult topic at the same time. Please just briefly allow me to introduce myself. I'm Sandra Kiken. I run a research institute in Berlin for the German DAX companies and the big corporates and the German government. I also do two companies in defense, and I'm mainly a cybersecurity expert, but also have been delving a bit into AI over the last years. Mainly from the defense point of view, though, because I know that a lot of my colleagues in the defense sector are very keen on developing AI-based weapon systems, reconnaissance systems, and systems of systems, and so on and so forth. So also in that field, it's a very challenging and demanding questions on what to develop and how to develop it. So I'll let my panelists introduce themselves in a minute. Just as a little kickoff into the discussion, there were two things that in the last, I think, 1.5 years that concerned me most about AI. The first thing was something I read, and I don't know how true it is. It was one of the smaller journals publishing this thing, but something I read about the Chinese government being worried about the posture and the status of their nuclear defense system. So apparently China is very worried about not detecting nuclear strikes against China. They're more worried about false negatives rather than the other way around. So they decided to put a lot of the nuclear sensory data and a lot of the nuclear counter-strike decision mechanisms onto an AI, which is of course something that knowing how immature AI is in many instances is something that can be very, very scary. If something happens to AIs, and also from a cybersecurity point of view, we took a look at how to hack an AI, and there are many, many ways, of course, to tinker with an AI by spoofing data, tinkering around with the algorithms, exchanging data tables or sensory data or something like that. Doing something like that, putting your entire nuclear defenses on an AI seems very highly irresponsible and very risky, not just for China, or maybe even not that much for China, but at least for the rest of the world. So this was something that has concerned me quite a lot, and that also has put up the questions in many, many groups that we had in Germany on how we can regulate this thing, and if any regulation that we did in Germany, in Europe, or even among the greater and Western allies would affect China at all, or if we would have to have global regulation, and how to push such a global regulation, how to push it in time, so it's actually faster than innovation. This seems to be the biggest problem that we're having all the time. So this was one very concrete topic that had a lot of concern, has received a lot of concern from many policy advisors as well. And the other thing that I witnessed in Germany, and this is a very German story, happens to us all the time, Germans are very, very keen on developing entirely 100% ethical technologies all the time, because the German ministries and governments don't want to be caught in parliamentary discussions and public discussions. They have a very bad standing in Germany. So whenever they see something that could even be mildly controversial, they usually shy away from it. They shy away from regulating it. They shy away from using it. They shy away from developing it until the ethical discussion is finished and there's a very clear legal groundwork available for these kinds of technologies. But at the same time, this very reaction, which is very typical in Germany, leads to the fact that we are very, very backwards when it comes to many technologies which do have sort of a complicated ethical dimension. It applies to many areas in cybersecurity and the more active parts of cyber defense. But it also applies to AI, where Germany, just as a lot of other European countries as well, prefer to discuss things rather than to develop things. And that may also be probably a wrong approach, because in this approach, what happens usually is that a lot of other nations, and many of which have very difficult political views on how to use these technologies are in the race much faster and much better than we are. So we're also giving away technological leadership in these fields to other nations who are less concerned with ethics. So just these two stories may show to you that on the one hand, it's very, very highly appropriate, very demanding, and very necessary to concern ourselves with the transparency of what an AI actually is and what it does, and the ability to control what it does and to discuss what it should be doing. On the one hand, on the other hand as well, not to try not to hinder progress too much, or not to just keep this discussion among the like-minded or in particular states, while other states are using this discussion or the delay caused by this discussion as something that provides asymmetric advantage to them. So this is something I think that at least concerns me, and we'll see if it concerns my panelists as well in some of their areas, which I know are very diverse. And with this, I want to stop my introduction, and I'd like to hand over to my panelists. And first of all, I would like them all to introduce themselves. And first, I would like to start with you, Yenatfanta.
My name is Yenatfanta. I'm an AI researcher from Ethiopian Biotechnology Institute, and I'm currently working on applying AI into the health sector so as to assist diagnosis. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mallory Knodel. I'm the head of digital for Article 19, which is a nonprofit organization based in London that defends freedom of expression and right to information. I run a team that is comprised of human rights lawyers, international relations experts, and technology engineers that we spend all of our time in technical standard setting bodies. So we are coming in with a human rights framework, trying to speak directly to engineers about the values, trade-offs that they make when they design and develop standards for internet protocols, hardware, chips, you name it. And so we are there to influence that process, including AI. So we also have a portfolio of work around researching AI and developing mechanisms and policies that would address some of the human rights concerns while the AI is being developed, and not waiting until after to analyze whether or not it is respectful of human rights.
Hi, everyone, sorry. I'm Neira Chaouch. I'm the Community Development Manager of Women in AI. It's an international global community of women beginners and experts in the field of AI. We count today more than 2,000 members all around the world, like with more than 80 countries. And our work is to try to solve the issue of the gender gap within the AI field. So we start with the finding that a lot of, many of the events, hackathon, meetups in the AI were attended by men with technical background, and many men on stages. Today we are lucky, we have like a majority of women here. And the thing is that we have to do a lot of things to make sure that women are part of this, of the discussion, the development of this technology. That's it for me.
Thank you. Mr. Soo-young. Introduce yourself quickly.
Okay, my name is Soo-young Lee. I'm serving as the director of Kai State Institute for AI. And for the last 33 years, I worked on neural net or machine learning researches. But for the 3 years before, when AlphaGo defeated Korean Go player, then a lot of people say deep learning does everything. But right now, I said that's not true. Deep learning has many restrictions, and the position I have got changed, because I need to inform many people deep learning is not a panacea. It has advantage and disadvantage. It is something doing well and something not doing well. Then we need to understand both sides and come up with better application and better uses of AI for human society. That's it.
Okay, thank you. So I'm very looking forward to discuss with you all, because you all seem so much more knowledgeable than I am, so I hope I learned something from you. And actually, the first question I'd like to ask to you is whether, looking at all the different scenarios that pop up in the use of AI right now, should we maybe make a distinctions among low-risk, mid-risk use cases and high-risk use cases, and should we maybe stop high-risk use cases like nuclear counter-strike capabilities? Would that be something, just asking you, all of you know something about AI, would you like to have a nuclear counter-strike system based on an AI?
Okay, so I'll start that way. I think the question is somewhat irrelevant at this moment, because we cannot just say high risk or low risk. That depends on whether it requires real-time operation or not. If the system requirement does not require real time, then we always ask, don't use AI for your final decision maker. AI needs to serve as assistant or advisor, and the final decision should be made by human. But in the other case, when real-time operation is required, the missile application one thing, but the other more popular case is autonomous vehicle. They require real-time operation. In that cases, if the risk to cost, a benefit to risk cost is very high, so that means even though you have risk, the benefit is much high for the autonomous vehicle, you should allow the AI can make the final decision. Otherwise, if the risk is too high compared to the benefit, then you should not allow AI to make the final decision.
Okay, so what about missile defense? And missile defense is very time critical. Sometimes you only have 6-7 minutes to make a decision. Would you put that on an AI making the final decision?
That require high risk. So if you have high risk factor and real-time factor, again I said, we only allow fully autonomous system with real-time and low risk. That means missile, you are not supposed to use full autonomous AI.
Okay. Any other positions on that?
It's actually said that algorithms or AI reflect the people who make it. So it all depends on the input data and the criteria that you give it in order to have the outcome based on different applications. So I say when it's a matter of life and death, the system should be used as an assistant to the human being or the person involved, so that the final decisions should be made with the person, not the AI. So I agree with Soo-young when he says that for high-risk cases, AI should be used as an assistant. Yeah.
Okay. But is it not probably too late to say that or to try to restrict AI? Because we seem to see, at least in many military scenarios, we seem to see a development that many of the actors would like an AI in these systems. And I mean, I don't know if any of those are actually already active, but at least they're building them, and they're building them to be active. So should we ban that? So should the United Nations come up and say something? Yeah? Okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So should the United Nations ban something like the use of AI in weapon systems, or is that something where we should trust that the geniuses in the militaries come up with the right decisions and answers?
I don't think that it should be only rely on the AI system. There should be some regulations made because in general we even don't know how human beings come up with some decisions to some extent sometimes. So leaving that to the machine all alone can be fatal. So I think there should be regulations as to how and when to use the AI system. So I think there should be made some kind of policies and regulations for that.
Okay.
I think even for the missile or nuclear or situation, I don't think we need, prohibit AI uses. We promote AI uses as an advisor, not the final boss, because I don't want my AI to become my boss.
Yeah, but I mean, it's difficult in situations where you only have 7 minutes to decide. If the advisor says, shoot the missile, then probably you don't have time to question the advisor's advice on whether it is sound or not.
That depends on who is your boss.
Yeah, that may be true.
For me, this question is really difficult to answer. It's hypothetical in some ways. It's like if you would ask me if, AI robots, like the singularity should be banned. It's a hard question because it's so much more complex than that. I think that, what we're looking at is, it's not that the final product exists, or maybe in this case it does. Maybe there's already been research and there's some technology out there that already exists that, is still being refined or could be changed. It's more about the process and the approach to all stages in all cases, because it is so specific. The fact that it's an algorithm making a decision is not the key point here. Technology is fundamentally about algorithms, honestly. It all needs to be taken as a case by case, folding it into our existing processes, laws, norms, and so on. And I think that something like this would be the same. So I think that there's a tendency to make AI really exceptional in the discussions that we have, but I find that there's already frameworks in place to deal with all kinds of export controls or weapons controls. I feel like this fits within those things if you look at it from the right angle and take the focus off of the sort of sci-fi nature of it, not CYFI, like SCIFI.
Something? Yes. Just I do agree with you too, because the thing is that the key question here is not the algorithm question. It's more about, I mean, even from a human point of view, when you are an expert in the missile and the military field, to take the decision to launch a missile or not, you have 7 seconds. Okay, you have to compare factors, to compare like a situation, and to come up with this decision. And our challenge here is to make sure that this decision-making process that we humans are putting in place and doing should be reflected in the technology. And here is the question: is how we ensure that. The technology is reflecting, the algorithms are reflecting the way we make decisions from an ethical and human being perspective.
Yeah, how can we do that? I mean, that's an interesting design question. And how can we, in particular, how can we put it into the design and verify that it's actually in the design and that the technology has maturity on this design level? Is that something the engineers can solve, or should lawyers be involved, politics?
I think everyone should be involved in the question. I mean, everyone from the civil society, thinking of psychologists, sociologists, and that's why it's great because we have different backgrounds. But I think from the field view, we need here some lawyers, we need some sociologists, we need some philosophers who think about the ethical issue and the ethical question. And by defining a framework or principles that we all agree from all our perspective, from different cultures and background, and based on this ethical framework, we can compare the data, the input and the output of algorithms to decide if it's to test them.
But that actually sounds like something that takes very long. Mallory, you said something very interesting, that you're actually trying to accompany and influence the design, the technical design. How timely is that? Are not the big Silicon Valley companies rushing ahead, and then when you come to them and tell them, hey, you should put this in, then they're saying, no time, ask me again in 5 years?
Yeah, this is such a good question. It is not easy coming into an engineering space and convincing people that they need to think about human rights. You have to be very concrete when talking to engineers. They want to know exactly what you mean and how you should rewrite their protocol or redo their hardware chip or something. So we do have, that's why we have technical experts who can actually look at code and say, if you make this tweak, that's easy. It is not the same for AI. It's maybe easy when we're talking about internet protocols. AI is a lot messier. I think that what we're looking at doing with AI is really breaking it down into a framework of development. So before you put a line of code down, your design of your system, thinking about the human rights implications, the ethical guidelines in that stage, which will be a fundamentally different conversation when you progress to the next stage, which is looking at where is your data coming from, and what does the data say, is it going to give you the result you want, are you collecting it in the right way, that sort of thing, and then how you train the data and give it feedback. So I'm not going to belabor all the points, but we're trying to look at how each stage is unique and how each stage could be influenced by some people who are not just engineers, so sociologists and so on. After I'm done, I would like to tweet out a paper that was also done in the context of India. So it looks at several AI initiatives in India and tries to look at this framework from design all the way to deployment and application, just so you can get a better idea. But I would just completely agree with what you're saying, which is there's no one place. So one of the places we worked was the IEEE had an ethically aligned design AI initiative. There's a publication out now. If you would like to read 300 pages about ethically aligned AI design, you can do that. We were able to get human rights as one of the, actually as the first principle that's listed in that book. That is just one tiny example. That's not going to change what Silicon Valley is doing. It actually is going to take, as you said, lots of institutions, because we have to reckon with several issues. We have to reckon with the legal, technical, and ethical frameworks here. The other thing to note is that every role that these institutions play is different. So, you know, regulation gives us enforcement mechanisms. Ethical codes of conduct, they create the utopia, or what we're trying to strive towards. Technical specifications help outline what is possible, what should be possible from a technical perspective. And then in my work, we believe that human rights gives the absolute minimum standard to which these systems must adhere. So it's a multi-layer, very complicated situation.
And I can add a little. I agree, we need multi-dimensional. Also, we need to learn from how brain does information processing. So I also actually, I'm basically electrical engineer, but I self-learn cognitive neuroscientist. Good. But on the other hand, if you want to implement ethics into your AI, how you can do that? So whenever you have that kind of question, my attitude, my direction is usually, if you want to ask the same question to human, how human brain will do. That's the way AI need to go through. The same thing, so if you have children, how you teach ethics to your children. I have 3 children and 6 grandchildren. I try to impose code of ethics for my children and grandchildren. It didn't work. Believe me, it will never work that way. So putting the code of ethics into your AI as a program of rule does not work. Because that's actually the reason old AI called rule-based expert system got failed. Don't try to do the same thing again. What you need is learning-based system. 3 years ago, AlphaGo defeated Go player. After then, everybody moved to the learning-based AI. That means we learn from the training there. So the best way to teach ethics to your children is to show good example. So today morning, one panelist said the value orientation. So we need to show our children the value of human society and what kind of goal we need to live with together. That's the way we teach the ethics to my children. The same way, we provide good ethical data for my AI, and then training that will give you generalized solution for AI. Of course, we don't have infinite amount of data, that means your trained AI may not necessarily be optimum. To have the remedy for that, the general rule many researchers are doing is, we start with the learning-based system, but before we actually doing some action, we have very simple rule to check whether this result made by AI, this decision made by AI will be okay or not. For example, very simple rule like Isaac Asimov 3 rules for robotics type of thing. But I don't think we're starting from the rule-based system at the bottom. The rule-based system is the final checker. Yeah.
I think a problem may be that the ethics in a way are rules, and you should comply to something as a rule. And I think if you're just putting an AI learning from humans behaving ethically, it will find so many deviations and so many humans not behaving ethically or finding some exceptions for themselves that maybe they
Yeah, but the other way, because if you set rules, you cannot set rules for all the possible implications. That's the reason rule-based system got failed.
Okay, Yenatfanta, you wanted to say.
Okay. So in order to include, like you said, companies now will not be so excited if you tell them to have like a transparent or ethical system. So, but the thing is, in the long run, if the algorithm is transparent, it will build trust in the system, so more customers will be present. And so, for example, if we want to tackle ethical point of view, we should have a method or a system that can analyze the algorithm before and after training, and also we need to test that algorithm or that system among different people or various kinds of people, and also have a representation of minorities and also participation of women and also minorities, and that all should be done before deployment. So if you, for example, some ethical point of view for one person can be a different one for the other and for other genders or cultures. So, but if you can involve different parts of the society, then they can come up with some kind of rule. And so if you can incorporate that rule or work with the public and also private organizations, and also research and incorporate that, integrate that ethical research finding into the system, and in turn that you can influence the policy makers to make a decision so as to implement that policy whenever an organization tries to implement an AI system. So I think they may think that it will hinder their product, like because there's most of the time there's a trade-off between accuracy and also transparency and stuff. But in the long run, I think we will get the benefit of it.
But is it also something you could turn into a business case? Because I think if I would be an investor and I would have the option to invest in an AI that's developed straightforward by just a small limited set of functional parameters, and an AI that, while I fully agree that what you're saying makes complete sense, and I would want any AI to behave that way or to be tested and developed that way, but as an investor who wants to see a return on profit, who wants to be first on the market, have to have first mover advantage, all these things, isn't that something that would be a very difficult business case, or do you see any kind of business case as well in an AI that is more informed, more just broad in its kind of expertise and training?
I see. When we say that the source code is the money, right, for business. So making it so transparent can be difficult for the business persons. So I would say that you can say transparency means like openness of the structure or the function of the algorithm. So you can say that, for example, if you want to make it open for the data scientist, it will help it to provide a better model and accuracy for it. And if you want to open it for the user for the end user, you can say that this is how this algorithm predicts, something like that, the step. And if you are worried about the business going through or being open, maybe I'd say that maybe you would show some part of it to the auditors or the regulators instead of the whole thing to the community and as well. Maybe that can save the business system from making it open all the way. That's it.
But how could we derive the other interesting part about your point was that the whole transparency discussions, and this was something that's going up and down all the time. We have it in Germany, like I said, with Google all the time. They don't want to show us the algorithms, of course. Very hesitant to do so, and even if they would show us, I would doubt that anyone in the German government would understand them. So the question is, how do we, first of all, how do we get the big companies and developers of AI to show us what they're doing, so we can have some insights? And secondly, how do we understand that politically, and how can we translate it into political implications, societal implications? Did you ever manage to explain to your politicians what your machines are doing, and did they understand it?
Okay. Yeah, for the last 33 years, I always try to convince the government people and industry people the learning-based AI is the way we need to go. So, but the problem right now, many issues on AI ethics, for me, shows human is not fair. The question we need to ask for AI ethics is not to be asked to the AI. That should be asked to the human. Because all the questions you have, the regularizations or transparency, that's for the human, not for AI. So I usually say AI is dangerous. However, AI is not more dangerous than human, because AI learns from human. The same way, we cannot ask, we need ask explainability or fairness to AI, but we cannot ask more than human. So I think, so however you want to say something to AI, just try to see the same question needs to be delivered to the human.
Any other positions on how to create transparency?
Like you said, it's all about the algorithms always reflect what their programmer has given them. Like if you have a misrepresentation of input data, or you have flawed criteria for how to get the output, or you have other parameters tweaked in the algorithm, that's all the doings of the programmer or the coder. So if there are more people involved in that, and if you can set up, like have various input data, and also try to involve every representation of the people that are affected by the output, and also try to test that system by the end users or the administrators and also policymakers and stuff. I think then you will have an inclusion of every criteria, and you will have a better performance of the AI. So it's all about the person who's making that algorithm or system.
I could respond to say, I think we all agree, but this is not my experience when I'm doing my work. There is an assumption that machines and technology are very efficient, they're very accurate. There's this veneer of objectivity, right, that we afford to machines, that we don't to humans. And I think often the debate comes in about that. Like, no question is the technology developed by humans, but it also means that those human characteristics and those things that are attributed to humans, like making mistakes and so on, they're encoded in to technology. I face a lot of engineers who believe that technology is neutral, that it's just, at the internet protocols just send packets back and forth. Like, how can that be a human rights issue? What am I doing in the room? And I think it is a real struggle, maybe not in this room and definitely not in this panel, but I face that a lot, where people are really convinced that technology is a neutral thing, and when we sort of put our values into it, like we are the people coming in and trying to make this a value discussion, and it's hard to bring the conversation back saying, actually, no, you are already having values conversations. They're just not the ones that we want you to have.
You're raising a very important point is that, people think, most of the developers and engineers within the companies are thinking that algorithms are neutral. And it's important to make sure that everyone within a company, like from the CEO to the intern, is involved on working on creating and designing a responsible, ethically responsible algorithms. And this is the thing. And just about the if I speak from my point of view as a representative of the Women in AI Association, it's when I started this association with the team, I found that around 20% of engineers, of women engineers, are developing and working in this field, and this is crazy. And this is crazy because we are designing algorithms that are gonna be part, an important part of our world, of future world, with the gender gap, gender biases, and this, and we need to solve the issue now and to make people just aware of this problem and this gender gap, and to make sure that the teams that are building these algorithms represent all parts of our society, and it's in terms of diversity. From a religion view, from a skin color view, from a community and male and female view, and just in addition to what you say about the Google, I think for the big companies, what we're not completely aware of and conscious about is that these big companies are today they have big elements of power in our society, because we had the market power, okay, big part of the stock exchange and all that stuff, a political power, through the lobbies and all that stuff, and now you have the data, all the data power, and the final power is that with all the works and researches that are made by this company, in laboratories, sorry. They're going to be master of AI, and if we should be aware of this, and that's why we need them to be as transparent as possible, and the governments and the civil society and all the parts of the society should work together to ask them as much transparency as possible.
So I'd like to add on something on the bias or fairness issue, because many of you already mentioned that. So basically there are three different bias issues. The first two come from the training data. The last one is algorithmic bias. So for the data bias, there are two different data bias. One coming from the bias of human society itself. The other is somebody manipulated the data, and the data become biased. For the first one, if the human society has some unfair bias, I don't know how to correct it. If somebody knows how to correct it, there will be God or something. There will be no war or complaint about it. So I cannot touch that. But if the data has manipulated by somebody, then we need to handle or detect it. But more important part is the algorithmic bias. Even though the best thing we like to do is the trained result of my AI should exactly work the same way as the training data works. But currently, the many deep learning algorithms amplifies the bias inside the training data and become much worse because the current deep learning algorithm try to get the minimum of the average. That means to get minimum of average, that means you can neglect some of the outlier. Neglecting the outlier, just going to the majority. That turns out to the algorithmic bias, and we are solving that problem. Many of us, including me and many others, solving the problem, so you don't need to worry about the algorithmic bias.
Okay, very good. So another question, do you have, I think we have a very diverse range in our countries regarding how AI is acknowledged. And I know in Germany every now and then something is discussed or not, but nobody really feels in charge of anything, and nobody wants to be in charge of anything because you can look very stupid when you're doing something on AI and you're doing it wrong. On the other hand, some other countries like the UAE have an AI minister right now. So they're putting it at least a little higher. I don't think he has a lot of money, but at least they're putting it a little higher on the political agenda. So do you have the feeling that politics are behind on this topic? Should they be more concerned with AI? Should there be more legal effort? Who should be concerned in the government, in politics? And how big of a priority should it be?
Okay. For example, when I talk about Ethiopia, there's a fear that when there's a computerized everything because most of the people may be uneducated and stuff, and they like paperwork, and that's all that they do or they understand. So there's a fear that AI will take over everything. So there's a fear of losing jobs and everything. But when it comes to the government, recently, they have set up an Ethiopian Biotechnology Institute, which has an AI department or directorate, which works in health part, in agriculture part, and also in the education part. And also they're trying to incorporate into the curriculum of AI education, because it's inevitable that there's AI in the world, and we have to come to that. But the problem is how we're applying the AI or customizing it to our situation, and trying to take the advantage of it and applying it effectively. So there is an initiation of updating or teaching everyone about AI and its use and applying it to some systems, but there's also work that needs to be done in Ethiopia. That's what I can say.
So when we talk about governments, we're really talking about two different roles that governments can play. One is to be potentially a regulator, which is important, and that role is needed because it's the thing that allows us to, to actually enforce issues that arise. And but for that regulation to be any good, for it to actually do what it intends to do, there needs to be lawmakers and policymakers need to be informed. And so that requires AI to be accountable and transparent, which is something that we've talked about before on the panel. So it's really difficult to come up with good regulation without that. And the other thing related to regulation that I'll say is that, it's really important to think about the human rights framework as an existing standard and an existing minimum from which governments could build up regulation and policy. But then the second role that governments play in this is often the initiators of initiatives. They have loads of data from civic and social programs, and maybe they want to make their civic and social programs more efficient. So they're actually the ones contracting the private sector to build things to help mete out different services, trash collection, health, etc. And so the government needs to be involved in these conversations with engineers about the design, development, data, training, all the way out until application and deployment, and it can't be at the end. It shouldn't be that they've just contracted a massive company to solve their trash collection problem with data and AI system. they need to be thoughtful about how that system is created from beginning to end.
The thing is, like, I don't have the answer, but it's about the human rights, I mean, from the human rights perspective. I grew up in Algeria. I'm half Algerian, half Turkish. I live in France. And, like, I face a lot of issues about human rights from the human rights perspective. Like, if I think on, as an Algerian, as a Turkish, as a French, as, like, it's very hard, like, to find a proper definition or a good way to think human rights, like from different perspectives. And this is the biggest challenge, I mean, the tricky question. It's like every country in the world has human rights violations. So which governments should decide which human rights principle you should apply? I mean, and I don't have the question as well. Like for me, it's hard to find an answer. I'm struggling with that. So.
Yeah. So in Korea, we are also discussing a lot how to handle the new issues like AI. But currently, what we are doing is try to use so-called sandbox concept. That actually means let it do whatever people want to do, and if something serious happening or side effect come, they try to find remedies. Because I'm basically a free man. I don't want somebody put me constraint on it. And the same way, I want my AI become free AI. And also, I usually say, if you treat your AI as your slave, they will become Terminator. They'll fight against you. But if you treat your AI as your friends or family members, then AI will treat you the same way. Okay, that's it.
Sounds a little scary to a layperson. Okay, we have a few more minutes for questions. Does anybody have questions? Yes, please, there. Ma'am, yes? Comments to the comment?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. If I gave the impression I was only talking about, engineers need to solve this you know, when they're writing code. That is definitely not what I meant. I meant exactly what you're saying, which is it needs to be taken in context and looked at in a complex way, in a nuanced way, at several different points. So yeah, we are in huge agreement about that. And I would just add too that I also agree that ethics is fuzzy. That's why I haven't said it much. I don't think I've said the word much. I'm mostly focused on human rights, because human rights, to me, are super concrete. Ethics, it's not clear what that means. And I think you'll notice that, I'm not saying that they're not valuable. I think actually human rights and ethics are really compatible, and they need to be done kind of in tandem. Because ethics is an interesting framework, and I think human rights brings some really concreteness to it. It brings the ability to action or react in a way that a nebulous concept like ethics doesn't. And this is another resource I can tweet out after the panel, which is how we actually break that down into what we think these different frameworks do. Because the other one that has been mentioned a few different times, but not as a framework, the framework is Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency, FAT. That's also a really interesting framework because it tries to engage more the technical implementation, because ethics is fuzzy from like a conceptual level and a technical level. FAT kind of gets more clear into the technical stuff, but then in human rights has more of the like concrete policy stuff. So they all kind of have to work together in an ecosystem to understand and analyze what is happening and if it should be happening at all, which is a really good point that you brought up too.
Thank you. John.
No, they need it for the video. There it is, working. So my friend Sandro, I have to do one thing here, which is I need to step on this nuclear weapons and AI issue. First of all, the Chinese are not going to try to have AI run their defense because they're a second strike posture, so that's not going to happen. The weapon states that are serious work very hard for information assurance and minimal complexity and resilience on their command and control systems for these weapons. Very hard, complete with cryptographic controls on the triggers. And so the last thing they're going to do is to put in systems which you cannot prove the correctness and completeness of the algorithm. So you don't know if it'll cover everything. You don't know if it'll be correct. And moreover, we have an open system. And AI, to date, does not do well in open systems. It does well in closed systems. So that's just not going to happen. So there's no need to panic about AI being in charge of nuclear weapons. There are other reasons to panic in terms of cyber interactions with nuclear weapons. And I've been talking with the Chinese on these questions and the Russians. And in 2 weeks, we're actually going to work the problem of nuclear strategic stability and the cyber crosscuts and electronic warfare issues, looking for mechanisms of instability to understand what we prioritize in terms of confidence-building measures to improve stability at this level. And as far as the Chinese, I was at their session on AI and military applications last November at the National Technical Defense University in Changsha. And the people had told me, oh, the Chinese are going to use AI to do like battle planning and all this stuff. And no, they're not. They actually understand the problem of the human in the loop, on the loop, and out of the loop. And so I think that in those kinds of dangerous areas, you need to have actually formal proofs for what the system's going to do. And it's not just when it's a sunny day, but when it's broken and under attrition. And so any responsible actor is going to do that. When we go to other domains, you know, I've seen a lot of this, and you have my talk from 2 years ago on looking at AI. A lot of people are using the term AI when they really mean neural net. The AI is a vast field that goes from robotics to computer vision to language understanding to speech recognition to inference and so on. And so it'd be helpful to discuss which particular algorithms, because they all have different characteristics. And to the ethics question, look this up. There's a field called deontic logic. And what these people do is they do theorem proving about moral issues. And so if AI is going to do moral reasoning, this is what it's going to do. The explainability problem arises from these statistical methods because they're opaque, like neural nets. But if you're using a theorem prover or a structural reasoner or certain kinds of rule-based systems or rule learning systems, They actually give you the proof in the derivation so you can read it off. So anyway, just a point of clarification, and particularly on this issue of nuclear weapons, people shouldn't panic about that. I'll give you other reasons offline on why you should panic.
Okay, good. Any comments on any of that? No? Deontology? No, wait. Yes? And we have one more question over there.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the panel for bringing these issues of bias and ethics in AI. I work focusing on, well, it just seems to me that there's a lot of areas where trade negotiations are suddenly coming into technology areas, and this is because the biggest technology companies are trying to do an end run around the type of regulation that you all are talking about, so that there won't be all these multiple stakeholders like human rights advocates and people who know digital sphere and gender advocates and anti-racism advocates at the table. And so there are proposals now being discussed for binding international treaty to ban governments from being able to require source code disclosure. And they're doing it under the guise of saying, well, we don't want China getting all of our trade secrets, but it really has tremendous public policy implications. And so I wonder if any of you have come across this and what you might think about whether or not it's a good idea for governments to agree to outright ban themselves from being able to require source code disclosure, or if that should be something that should be settled in more of a regulatory dialogue where you have multiple stakeholders with different interests and points of view at the table. Thank you.
Well, I can say from my world that we actually do have source code disclosure in place for almost anything anyhow already. Everything that's security relevant. So just you will just have to put an AI into the security relevant area and you automatically have source code disclosure to almost every nation in the world right now.
Yeah. Okay, I have two comments. The first one is why we need to consider ethics for AI. You don't consider ethics for refrigerator, but we need to consider ethics for AI because AI is learning. The autonomous vehicle you will use in the future is not exactly the same as they are manufactured. They learn your driving style. So therefore, the manufacturer will not be liable for whatever consequences the AI should have. Therefore, somebody, the people, they train it, should have the responsible, and we need to discuss the ethics of AI.
Okay, thank you. So I just got a signal that we have to close the panel session. I'd like to thank my panelists. I'd like you to join me to thank them. This was an excellent panel.